bum, 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 bum. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Rabbi. Good to see you again. How was shiur yesterday? Can you hear me?
Very nice. Baruch Hashem.
Thank God.
Yeah, thank God we have a nice outdoor space, so it feels safe. The weather is beautiful.
Perfect. Baruch Hashem.
Yep. Okay, when you go back to work, no, you're working out of the house.
I go a little later, but I go to work almost every day.
And you go indoor environment.
Well, actually, nobody's there. Everybody else is telecommuting, so I'm alone. Thank God.
That's great. Because here in California, the cases are going up again.
Yeah, I heard. Unfortunately,
especially because of these mishagoyim.
The riots, yeah, of course, yeah. And
yeah, because on a couch, it's a whole new madrega, it's a machaya. For the first time, because I'm running to shul, I have my shoes on. I have been learning with my slippers for 10 weeks. Yeah, get back into it. All right, my fellow Jews, here we go. Let's do it. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shabbos DAF Tzadik Tes. We're going to learn a little bit more about the Mishkan versus the oil. As we have been learning that the Mishkan had the lowest cover, is what we call actually the Mishkan. Above it was the other cover called the oil. Above it was the cover called the Michsei. There might have been even the Tachash on top of that as well. Al Pi Chasidus, they refer to the various oilamas, and therefore the higher the cover, the higher the world, the more subtle and the greater the spheres that they represent, as we'll see here in the Gemara. We're going to learn a little bit, we mentioned this already yesterday, regarding the minimum width that is needed in order for that location to be defined as a Reshus HaRabim. And that is a width that no one debates about. You have to have an area that is 16 amas wide, and everything, as we are seeing, comes from the way we camped, from the way we traveled, from the activities that we did in the Midbar, particularly as it comes to the building of the Mishkan. And as we already began to speak out, we'll speak out again, that be'emes, if you go lemata ma'asara tfachim, the width of the agoles was only 15 amas and not 16 amas, so we'll have to explain where the 16 amas comes from. We're going to start on Daf Tzadik Tes, the new Mishnah. The new Mishnah is going to speak yet more cases about Hoitzah, and again, we're going to be focusing on the unique throwing aspect of Hoitzah. And on Daf Tzadik Beis, Tzadik Tes on the days, we're going to have a series of fascinating boyas inquiries. Also related, there is a concept known as two things that boyim ka'achas. For example, my friends, we say that when a man divorces his wife, Gita v'yada boyim ka'achas, was really a man v'nasan v'yada. He has to put the get into her hand. Halachically, her hand is an extension of the hand of her husband. So if she doesn't yet have her hand, how can she accept the get? For her to have a hand, she has to already be divorced. So we say no doubt her hand and her get, they come at the same time, which is really something very difficult to grasp, because when you have a cause and an effect, by default, the effect has to happen after the cause. It's the cause and an effect. To have a cause and an effect happening at the same time is kind of amazing. We're going to be questioning whether we can apply the same concept of two things coming together, as we'll see, both when it comes to the Akira and when it comes to the Hanacha, and a lot more. With that, let us start. We left off on Daf Tzadik Tes on the Dalef, the last word, right? The last words on the top line, Tanu Rabbanan. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Malachenu she'achol nimi dvarim. Tanu Rabbanan, says the Gemara, we learned in a Braisa that Yediyos Hatachtoinos, the lower curtains, we're speaking about the spread over the Mishkan, right? The lower curtains is what we actually refer to with the word Mishkan. So not only does it serve as some sort of covering, but it happens also to be, as we just finished learning, that when you were inside the Mishkan and you looked up, you saw the Mishkan. You didn't see the oil, you didn't see the michsei, you didn't see the tachash, right? And therefore its decor was also beautifying the inner room. And indeed, as it says in the Braisa, it was a composite of tcheles, right? Tcheles wool, argomon, purple wool, toilashani, red wool, and together with that sheish, linen, all of that as is written explicitly in Parshas Truma, and the Elyahu, the cover that was yet on top of that, the one on top of the Mishkan is the oil, was apparently a lot simpler. Shalmaiseism was basically made out of the hair of a goat. So you would think, that the one on top was a lot easier to make. It's made only out of one fiber. Says the Braisa, that the amount of chachma, the amount of expertise that was needed to make the oil was much greater than that which was needed to make the lower ones. And this is written in the Chumash. The pasuk uses the words v'chol isha chachmas leiv, right? She needed to have a wise heart. So she was the one that biyodeh tavu, right? She would spin the threads with her hands. When it comes to the Elyahu, when it comes to the pasuk referring to the making of the oil, it says v'chol anashim asher nasa liban. Extra words. You didn't have it above, right? Nasa liban means that their hearts were filled with inspiration. So this Nasa Liban, right, is speaking about a higher degree of wisdom. There's so much to learn from it. First of all, again, al piruchnias, as we mentioned, the higher the cover, it represents a higher olam. And indeed, as we know in Hasidus, that the higher you go, the simpler things become. Simple doesn't mean less wisdom. Simple means greater wisdom. And that's the emes. Right, the biggest chachamim are the ones that speak less. The biggest chachamim are the ones who say things that are simple. Simple means great, not the other way around. The more sophisticated things become, the more complex things become. It's because we're getting all away from the essence, and the essence is one God. So the more there is oneness in whatever you are looking at, the greater of the chachma there is, the closer to the emes you are. And as things start, like in this world, to become very confused and very nuanced, that's not an indication, that person is so nuanced, how smart they are. That's a raya that these people are going further and further away from wisdom. Okay, now the Gemara goes weiter. One of the expressions in where we see that you needed even a greater amount of wisdom to be able to make the oil, because indeed, V'tanya Mishum Rab Nechemia, guys, we learned this above, that they actually prepared a big part of the oil while it was still connected to the backs of the goats. Shatuv ve'izim, it was washed when the hair was still connected. Even when it was spun, they spun the hairs while it was still on the backs of the izim, and that's mamash something exceptional. Now the reason why they did that is because at the end product comes out a lot more beautiful. But this concept of it being connected to its source is also an indication of greater chachma. And indeed, by us, the more connected we are to God, and the simpler of a life that we have, and the greater we connect to our emunah pshuta, and as the Baal Shem Tov celebrated the greatness of anashim pshutim are kalim to a much higher level of godly wisdom, as it's seen. All right, right. Now we're going back to the Mishnah and Daf Tzadik Vav. So the Mishnah spoke about shtei gezus terois. We're speaking about the two protrusions, the two porches. All right, and then if you would pass an item from one to the other, so said the Mishnah, if they are on the same side of the Reshus Harabim, not on opposite sides of the streets, and all of the details, even though it's Lamayla Masara Tvachim, even though it's two people involved in passing an item, it's only going over. It's going over Makim P'tur. It's going through a Makim P'tur. You're going to be chayiv. Why are you going to be chayiv? Says the Mishnah, because Shekei Masa B'nei Levi, when they would pass the boards from one wagon to another wagon before they began to travel, The wagons, the 4 wagons were all on the same side of the street. Really, there was no streets. It was just a desert, but they were all aligned. So they would dismantle the Mishkan. They would put the boards on the wagon closest to the Mishkan, but then they would take those boards and they would bring it to the front wagon. So what would it be? It would be a Levi on one wagon, another Levi on another wagon. Each wagon, like we mentioned, had walls that were 10 tfachim high. Its floor was more than 4 by 4 tfachim, right? It was 5 amas by 2.5 amas. So it's a bona fide Rishus HaYachid. And that was an avodah that they did. Thus, any moishet of this sort, right? Even though you can argue, right, Zvika, that why doesn't this teach you that even the L'mayla Masar Tvachim is called carrying? We don't view it that way. We view this as the exception. Okay, says Amar Rav, Mishum Rab Chia, we learned this yesterday, that Agalois, he said a statement regarding the wagons, Tach Tehen, when you were under the wagons Taka did not have floors, they had pegs, but when they were covered, when you had the Karashim on them, they were more or less completely covered. Not only was the wagon area covered, but every Kaddish, we said, was 10 amas high, 1.5 amas wide, and 1 amma thick. So whether you were under them, whether you were name in between them, because when it traveled in the desert, it was the 4 wagons of the Bnei Merorais. They were not in a line, but they were 2 behind 2 or 2 in front of 2. So there were a wagon at the side of a wagon. Each Kaddish took up, like we mentioned, 10 amas. So when they were side by side, if you were measuring Kaddish to Kaddish, it was 20 amas. In between them means if you were under the Karashim, not under the wagon, not even under the sides of the wagon, which refers to the area where the wheels protruded beyond the walls of the wagon, completely in between them, and Vitzideim, in the area connected to under the wheels, wherever that is, even while the Karashim were on it, it had a status of a Rishus HaRabim, as we explained yesterday. If you were Taka under the Kadesh, then that would not be called a Rishus HaRabim, because one of the criterions that defines a Rishus HaRabim is an area that's not roofed. But as we mentioned, it was 5 amas long, so either they stacked it, they put the length of a Kadesh on the width of a wagon. You had now 5 amas. So if you laid it on the 1.5 amma side, you were able to lay 3. Now each wagon carried 12 karashim. So then you made piles. Each pile was 4. So you had 4, 4, and 4. Each one taking up 1.5 amma, correct? And then you had the gap in between. Well, really, that gap we learned was less than 3 tfachim. So it doesn't fit with the rule of lavut. So we concluded that they were stacked on their 1 amma depth side. So they were able actually to put 4 of such rows. The advantage of putting more rows is that you didn't want to stack them up too high because you're traveling, you don't want the karashim to fall. So each row had 3 karashim on them. And here you have, like we mentioned, it was 2 of the 4 together, another 2 of the 4 together. You had a whole amma in between. Under that amma is what Rav is referring to, what Rabbi is referring to, that was completely unroofed and it had a status of a Rishus HaRabim. Asks the Gemara, Amar Abaye ben Agala Lagala. We know that how much space was in between one Agala and the other, and the answer is Kamaloi Oirach Agala. You had the areas in between them that was not Tzideim, but if you have the wagon to the right and the wagon to the left. So look at the wagon to the right. If you're going from right to left, and if you're going beyond the left wheels on the right wagon, beyond that, until you hit the right wheels of the left wagon, how much area do you have that's completely empty? So he says, Kimuloi Oirach Hagala, the exact amount of space that was the length of every wagon, and how long was every wagon? 5 amas. And if whoever's using a art scroll, using a Rabbi Steinsaltz, you're going to see a Gavaldic picture just to see that, because the wagon was 2.5. Like we mentioned, every wheel protruded 1.25. Okay, and then in between that 1.25 and the other 1.25, you had 2.5 for one and 2.5 for the other, as we explained yesterday. Since the Kedoshim were 10 amos long, and you wanted them to be aligned to the best way you could on the wagons, so you really have 5 amas, because in between the width of the wagon and you add together both wheels, 2.5 and 2 is 5. So how much is left that is going to be completely over nothing, over the ground, over the sand, another 5. That 5 is divided into half, 2.5 for each side. So each side had 2.5 of the Kaddish sticking above the ground. So 2.5 next to the neighboring wagon, 2.5 and 2.5 is 5. Now, says the Gemara, Lamali, why did we need for the wagons to be 5 amas long? But the answer is, and the question is, Ba'alma upalgasagi, 4.5 amas would have been enough. Now, 4.5 amas would have been enough. In either way, we learned yesterday, if you are putting the karashim on the side that it has 1.5, so 1.5 times 3 is 4.5. Even if you're going to stack them up on the sides that it is 1, so really the emes is that it would be enough for you to have 4, right? The reason why we're saying you need to have 4.5 is because don't forget, my friends, that we spoke yesterday that aside of the B'riach HaTichon that went inside the Karashim, there was 2 other golden beams that kept them together when they were standing, and they went through rings. So on one side of the Karashim, there were protruding rings. And so even though you can put 2 piles back to back, mamish, because the rings would not get in the way, but it will be impossible for you to put all of the 4 back to back, because the Karashim, the rings would not allow them to touch. So you needed some sort of space. So we're saying that a half an amma would have been enough, but you don't need to have a whole 5. So answers the Gemara, we don't want for the boards to be tightly pressed together, so therefore you have to have a little bit of an extra half an amma. Now, Chavre, this question and answer is a lot more meaningful than it appears. Just to understand the principle that in Kedusha, things are precise. Things are precise. Things are exactly the way they have to be. It's not more, it's not less. Klipa, being that externally it looks like you're going away from holiness, so it's like hefkerdik. Hefkerdik means you can excess, you can have more than you need, or God forbid, you can have less than you need. All of that is connected to klipa. So being that we're speaking about the Mishkan and everything, there is you have a gilui of Kedusha, so things should be precise. And the answer of that is that in Olam Haza Agashmi, even when you are connected to Kedusha, a little bit of excess is needed. You know, there's a Zohar, I think it was in Parshas Yisro, that speaks about our minig, that when we have a challah, right, we don't eat up the whole challah, we leave the edges of the challah. This is an interesting piece of the Zohar that many people have that minig in their families. I don't know if I saw that by my parents, by my father, that he used to cut off the end of the challah. Why don't you eat up the whole challah? Why do you have to leave excess? So he writes over there that you're feeding, he's using the words of the Zohar, that little excess of the challah is giving the bone to the dog. And that's a mashal in the Zohar that the dog represents klipa. And in the world of Atzilus, everything is exactly precise. In Olam Haza, if a person is going to live that precise, they're going to break. And then they're going to go to the other extreme. So you're a little bit of excess, a little bit now. The little bit off is never a little bit less. The little bit off has to be a little bit more, a little bit extra. But even when you're connected to Kedusha, it's important to have a little bit more. If not, people cannot function that way when things are too precise. Next, Amar Rava, same type of question. The width of the wagon, the sides of the wagon, that means the area of the wheels. Each wheel protruded 1 1/4, so you have wheels of both sides. So 1 1/4 and 1 1/4 is 2.5, which is exactly the same width of the wagon, which is the kamanei chavagola, shtei amas v'machzah. So here again, the kasha is, why do they have to make the wagons 2.5 amas wide? 1.5 amas wide would have sufficed. Wow. Why did it have to be that wide? Now, why are we saying that 1.5 would have sufficed? Why 1.5? Why not 1? What's 1.5? Because even though they would put the karashim, the length of the kaddish went on the width of the wagon, they wanted to have the option of putting the length of the kaddish on the length of the wagon. And how long was each kaddish? An amma and a half. And even if you're going to lay it on the amma depth side, we already established that you have to have a little bit of excess. So 1.5 we can accept. But why do you have to have more than 1.5? Answers the Gemara. The kaddish was 10 amos long. 10 amos long. So if you're going to put something that's 10 amos long on a very narrow wagon, that means that each side is going to be going out a lot. Then it's possible, seesaw, it's going to lose its balance. Don't forget, it's moving on the desert. So the right measure is for something that's 10 amas long. The base should be 2.5. That's 1/4. At least 1/4 was mamash on the wagon, and that allowed you again to have each other side protruding equally, and that would make sure that it doesn't lose its balance. So now that we established that the wheels protruded 1.5 amas. Now, again, if you have a picture, it's easy. If you don't have a picture, let's use our heads, which is also better. We're not looking at the edges of one keddish to the edge of the other keddish, which is 20 amas. We're not looking at that at all because it was above 10 tfachim. We're not counting anything above 10 tfachim as the Rishus Harabim. If you were to be standing now in the desert and you would be witnessing the Levium, the Bnei Meraris pushing the wagons, riding the wagons, and you were to measure on the ground, if you're starting on the leftmost extremity of the wheel to the rightmost extremity of the wheel, you will have exactly 15 amas. It has to be 15 amas. It's 15 amas because the wagon, we said, is 2.5 amas. The wheels protrude in each side together another 2.5 amas. So how much of the keddish did it take up? That's 5 amas. Then in between both wagons, you have another 5 amas. So that's 5 and 5. And then when you go to the other wagon, again, from one wheel to the other wheel, it's again 5 amas. It's 5 amas because 2.5 for the wagon itself, and each wheel takes up 1.25. So it's 5, that's 15 amas. So why are we continuously saying that the minimum width of an area for it to be defined as a Rishus Harabim is a 16 amma width? Why? In the middle, on the ground, there was only 15 amas. Why? And the question is, the Mishkan was only 15. How do you get to 16? So answers the Gemara, so you say to Havoi, when they would travel, they would have to leave on the side of each wagon. We're speaking about the extremities. A half a amma, which totals 1 amma. Why is that? To have a koi ben Levi, to allow an area for a Levi to squeeze into. Because if the boards would begin to slide, have a nugget, he would be able to grab onto them and to set them in their place. Every wagon had on them either 3 rows or 4 rows of crushing. And like we mentioned yesterday, there was some space in between these rows. Now the wagon is traveling, so you have 3 or 4 crushing stacked up. What were to happen if they begin to slide off? If one row begins to slide off, we're not speaking about side to side, but we're speaking about that's going to begin going in the length. So you need to have a Levi that gets in between these rows and stands them back up. But for him to be able to get there, he has to go around the wagon to the sides. Right, what is it called today in a highway? An emergency road, that you have on the side of a highway. You have a shtickle pavement.
Shoulder.
A shoulder. You need to have a shoulder. That's it. And so then, again, it's kedusha. It's not a shoulder the size of the road. It's actually very little. But it's a little bit of a shoulder that you need in order for the Levi to get in there. And when you count a shoulder, that's part of the road, you have a total of 16 amas. That's your source of 16 amas. Okay, gewaldig. Coming back, as we mentioned, to other unique circumstances where we will apply the din of Haitza'ah. Rishus HaYachid, Rishus Harabim. Let's go back to a Rishus HaYachid. The simple criterion that defines a Rishus HaYachid is an area that has 4 by 4 tfachim. 4 by 4 tfachim, that's the platform size, and it is either above the Rishus Harabim or below the Rishus Harabim, 10 tfachim or more, or it can even be on the same height, but there are walls surrounding it that are 10 tfachim tall. That's a Rishus HaYachid. So says the Mishnah, Chulias Haboir. Chulias Haboir means the bank of a pit. And as the Gemara is going to better define, when you dig a pit in the Rishus Harabim, whenever you dig a pit anywhere, so where do you put the earth of the pit? You put it on the side of the hole. So what really happens is, if you're going to come and tell me, for that pit, for that hole, to have the din, the status of Rishus HaYachid, well, it has to be 4 by 4 and 10 tfachim deep. What happens if the hole itself is not 10 tfachim deep? Let's say the hole is only 9 tfachim deep. The hole is only 8 tfachim deep. But the earth that you put around the hole, the earth that came from the hole, is 2 tfachim high. So if you count the height of that earth together with the depth of the pit, together you come to 10 tfachim. And that's what the Mishnah is really referring to. That also makes the pit considered a pit that has a 10 tvachim all around it, and it will become a Rishus HaYachid. Oh. So that's Chulias Habar. Or simple a rock. That's simple. So you have a rock. We're speaking about a rock that's the top of the rock is 4x4. The height of the rock is 10 tvachim. The rock doesn't belong to any private person. The rock is in the middle of the public domain. Halachically, the top of the rock is a Rishus HaYachid. And therefore, says the Mishnah, and that Shehem Gevayin Asara, and V'rachman Arba, they have the height of 10 and the width and the length of 4x4. So the din is, Hanoitel Mehem, if something is on the rock, Lamashal, or if something is inside the pit, which means halachically it's inside a Rishus HaRabim, and they're going to take it from it and place it in the Rishus HaRabim, or the opposite, or Bahan Noisan Al Gabon, something was stationary in the Rishus HaRabim, and you picked it up and you put it on top of the rock, or you picked it up and you put it into the pit. So that's the case where you're chayiv. You're chayiv because you transferred from one domain to another domain. However, pachos mikein, but if the dimensions either of the pit, either it's not 4x4, or the height of the walls is not 10. Same thing with the rock. Either the rock is not tall 10, or the rock is tall 10, but it's not 4x4. In all of these cases, it's not a bona fide Rishus HaYachid. So then, midoiraisa, you will not be chayv chatos pater. Asks the Gemara, I don't understand, why did the Mishnah have to give two cases of a chulias haboir and a sela? Lama did the Mishnah chulias haboir vehasela? Litni, if you only want to emphasize that a Rishus HaYachid can either be higher or lower, so right, sela, right, boid. Boid means if you have a pit, if the pit is 10 tvachim deep and inside the ground of the pit is 4x4, so it's indented, or a stone which is protruding, so that's going to be a Rishus HaYachid. What's the chulias? Why are you adding that detail that there is earth around the pit? Says the Gemara, Misayeya Leila Rabbi Yechanan, the Rabbi Rabbeinu HaKadosh is hinting to that which will support the sheet of Rabbi Yechanan, the Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Boir v'chuliasa mitzvah from Hasaram. In order to get the height of a 10 tvachim wall, you don't need for the pit itself to be 10 tvachim deep. You are allowed to combine the height of the earth around the pit together with the depth of the pit, even though, guys, it's a big chiddush because the mound of earth around the pit is not aligned with the floor of the Rishus HaRabim. Nevertheless, I don't care. Look inside the pit. The pit has a wall that's 10 tvachim tall. But starfen, they combine two asara in any way. It can be 5 and 5. It can be 9 and 1. It can be 8 and 2. If it totals 10, you got yourself a bona fide Rishus HaYachid. And not only that, Tanya Nami Hachi, we actually find a brayso that says so explicitly that if you have a boir in the Rishus HaRabim, the brayso really wants to emphasize is that Rishus HaYachid does not mean privately owned. That's what you see. It belongs to the public. It's in the public domain. And it is Amuka Asara. Urachavar Bon. So we're speaking about a water pit. Says the brayso, a nimalon hemenu b'Shabbos. You cannot fill a bucket from it on Shabbos. Why? Because since the pit is 10 by 4 by 4, so the water is in a Rishus HaYachid. You're standing outside the well, the pit. You're standing in a Rishus HaRabim. You're removing the water. That's a modified act of transferring, right? DAF Tzadik Tes. Have turn the Amid base. Elim Kain, only if only if around the area that you're standing, you make another mechitza that has 10 tvachim tall, and therefore you're going to be standing in a location. It can belong to the public, but that it is surrounded by 10 tvachim tall wall, and you are standing on an area that has at least 4 by 4, then you are also standing in a Rishus HaYachid. So you're taking the water from a Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaYachid. Guys, if you remember, we learned this earlier in the Masechta, the concept of pasei berois, that really Chazal made a takana, and this was used when we were traveling from Babel to go to the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore, there were certain highways that everyone took. And we would stop on the side of the highways for Shabbos. It would take us a long time to get there. And there were wells that were made for the public. But again, on Shabbos, how can you get waters out of the well? So Chazal were even more lenient that you don't need to have mamish mechitzas of 10 tvachim around the wells, but they had these they had these L-shaped, what are they called in construction? When you have a when you have a, there's a name for that. There's like an elbow. So you have a wall that was 1 amma, perpendicular to another amma, and it went a couple of tfachim away from the pit. Then you had another one on the other side of the hole. Then you had 2 others in the other directions. So you really didn't even have a real mechitza surrounding everything. But halachically, when you were inside those pasei berois, it's considered as if you're inside a walled-off area. That was gavaldik, because that allowed animals to walk in and out of that area without them bumping into a wall. And furthermore, says the Braisa, if you have such a pit, the ein shoysin himenu b'Shabbos, not only can you not take the water out, you can't stand on the edge of the well and drink water because you're taking it into the Rishus Harabim. What about if you put your mouth over the well? If you put your mouth over the well, then you're bringing the water from the Rishus Hayachid. It's not going into the Rishus Harabim. Midoraisa, you're good. But Midrabanan, what were they afraid? They were afraid that if your mouth is over the well, all you need to do is give a little move backwards, and you're going into the Rishus Harabim. So Midrabanan, you may not do it. But if not only your head, but the majority of your body is leaning over the well, so then even Midrabanan, they were not afraid that you're going to lean backwards because you're leaning over so much. That's to remind yourself, that you're standing on a Rishus Harabim, you better drink while you are in the Rishus Hayachid. Now, Atkan has nothing to do with Rabbi Yechanan, but the Brisa concludes, and if you have this water pit, don't say that if the floor of the water pit is not 10 tefachim deep, then I have no problem, because then it's not a Rishus Hayachid. No, that if you have, committing all the pictures of a well, that around the well you have a little brick wall. So if together with the wall around the pit, together with the depth of the pit, if you are inside, if you measure 10 tefachim, the Brisa says that makes it into a Rishus Hayachid. And now we begin with the series of inquiries, beginning with an inquiry that was asked from Rav Mordechay, either to Rava, or as he amends, or to Rabbi, the following. These are all cases that we had so many times, and that's the Gavaldika part of the Gemara. After we establish something, now we're going to challenge something that we all think we know the din is. You're standing in the Rishus Harabim, and there is a pillar, and the pillar has 10 tfachim height, and the top of the pillar is 4 by 4 tfachim. So we already know that the top of the pillar is called a Rishus Hayachid. Now we're speaking about throwing. Comes a Yid on Shabbos, they're standing in the public domain, Zajac, and they throw an item there from the Rishus Harabim. So the Akira was from a Rishus Harabim, and it flies up, and it goes over the pillar, and it falls onto the pillar. Nach al Gabav. So what will be the din? What do you mean? You're chayv chatos, right? Akira b'Rishus Harabim and a hanacha in b'Rishus Hayachid. Says Rav Mordechay, maybe not. Me, I mean, do we say Hare Akira b'Isr and therefore and Hare hanacha b'Isr and therefore Yechayev, right? Or maybe not. We're not speaking about carrying. We're not speaking about passing. We're speaking about throwing. So the item left the Rishus Harabim, because the Rishus Harabim ends by 10 tefachim. In order for it to land on top of the pillar, that means it flew through a makom ptur. So there was maybe an interruption between the Akira and the Hanacha in a makom ptur. Zajac, like we're up to DAF, we're almost up to DAF 100, and all of a sudden we're bringing in such a question. Kiven de makom ptur ka'asya. So maybe lo, you're not chayiv. Tosfos is very bothered. I don't understand. You made Akira, you made a Hanacha, Rishus Harabim to Rishus Hayachid. What do you mean it went through a makom ptur? Now, truth be told, you think about it. We already mentioned, and not that long ago, that since when we carried in the midbar, the Bnei Kahas, the Aron on the shoulders, so we carried items through a makom ptur. Here, your feet are on the ground. When you stop, that's a Hanacha. Here you're not carrying, here you're throwing. And Tosfos, the second Tosfos on the top, by Tosfos Divrei Maschil Oy Dilma, a couple of lines down, in the beginning of the line, he brings from Haraf Poiras. He brings another very gavaldic logic over here. He says that when you throw something, think about gravity. when the item fell down on the pillar, whose koyach was in that item for it to fall down on the pillar? Whose power was in there? It was already gravity. It wasn't your power. It's like your power, you're standing on the floor. You're throwing something up. So as long as the item is flying up, your koyach is in it. Why did the item fall down on the pillar? Because your koyach left it. It's it went up. Then there was like a theoretical moment where it stopped. And now gravity kicks in. And that's even true if it's going on an angle. But it's not fully your koyach. When did it stop going up and start going down? It stopped. That happened while it wasn't a makom ptur. That's why there's a side to think that you're going to be a potter. Again, there was an interruption between the Akida and the Hanach, and that interruption happened in a makom ptur. So Amalei, to which Rabbi responds that really our Mishnah will answer your question. Which Mishnah? Our Mishnah. Did he explain? No. Asnisani. And he expected Rav Mordechay to understand. Now Rav Mordechay was not happy with the answer. So he went and he asked the same question to Rabbi Yosef. And Amalei Rabbi Yosef tells Rabbi the same answer. Asnisani, it's our Mishnah. He went and he asked Abaya. And again, Abaya said, our Mishnah responds to your question. And Rav Mordechay was very frustrated. And when he tells them, Kulchu beruka dahadadi tapisu. You are all spitting the same spittle. Today, you know, from the coronavirus, when you're talking, right, there's droplets. You're all knocking out the same droplets and not good ones. I don't accept it. I takem. Right, Vatnan, we learned in our Mishnah that hanoitel mehen v'noisen al gabon, you're chayif. All right? That's what they're telling Rav Mordechay. So what do we see from over here? When you pick something up from the pit, where are you taking it through? You're taking it through a makom ptur. If you're taking something off a rock and you're putting it on the ground, well, if the top of the rock is above 10 tvachim, you're going through the makom ptur. Haraf Toiras and Toismus adds that it must be that the raya that they had is because they were not only learning our Mishnah, that the Mishnah is speaking about someone carrying. Like, the Mishnah is in what Pedic? What's the name of the Pedic, my friends? Hazoirek. The Mishnah doesn't differentiate. It's also referring to a case of throwing. Even when you throw, the fact that it goes through a makom ptur doesn't break the akid and the hanacha. So they were right, all these three Amayroim, by telling Rav Mordechay our Mishnah. So Amalahu, to which Rav Mordechay tells him our Mishnah proves nothing. Because it could be that our Mishnah is speaking about a machad, you're dealing with a needle. The height of the needle is mamish nothing. So if you're, let's say you're standing on the ground and you're throwing it on top of a rock, it never entered makom ptur. It went up exactly 10 tvachim and it landed on top of the rock. Lav dafka, the item was large, was tall enough that it needed to go above into the makom ptur. Says the Gemara, I don't understand what Rav Mordechay is saying. I don't care how little a machat is. Doesn't matter. For the top of the cellar to be a Reshus HaYachid, the top of the rock has to be 10 tefachim tall. For something to go over it, doesn't it have to go into a makom ptur? Even if it's a millimeter, who cares? It has to go beyond the height of the rock. Frek the Gemara on Rav Mordechay. Even by a machat, it has to be a little bit taller than the height of the rock. So to which the Gemara explains why Rav Mordechay was not happy bringing our Mishnah as a raya. No, and this is a rule. It's called Chayrei Reshus Harabim. Once you have a Reshus Harabim, like the rock, if there is something protruding out of the rock, not 10 tvachim tall, if there's something protruding out of the rock close to the top, but it's protruding out of the rock, and it's something, I'm saying close to the top because it has to be an area that people who are walking in the public domain make use of. And really we learned already that this is 9 tvachim tall. Because if I'm walking down to the Reshus Harabim and I have a backpack and there's something protruding walls going into the airspace of the Reshus Harabim that's 9 tvachim tall, if I want to adjust my backpack, I'll use that. So if there is something protruding out of that rock, and that has the status of a Reshus Harabim, could be the case of the Mishnah was, you threw the needle and it landed on that protrusion. Or inami, that amya bacharitza, that there is on top of the rock, there is a crevice. And the needle flew into the crevice. It is possible to formulate a case of our Mishnah where the item did not fly through the makom ptur. And that's why Rav Mordechay rejected any proof from our Mishnah. And this question remains unanswered. And again, the way that Tosfos learns, carrying, of course, I don't care if you carry in a makim ptur, because the truth is, if I'm carrying, even if I just stop without putting an item down, and the item is on my shoulder, or the item is in my hand, which is above 10 tefachim, we already established, we don't view that as a makim ptur. But by throwing, and the way he explains, you throw it up, your koyach left. Now gravity kicks in, or partially kicks in. That might be considered an interruption. Let's go with more phenomenal inquiries. Amar Rav Miyasha. You should know that by Rabbi Yechanan, Koisel Bereshus Arabim, if there's a wall in the public domain, and the wall is Gavaya Asara, but this is important. The wall is not 4x4. The thickness of the wall is not 4x4, which means that what is the top of the wall? As we have been defining, the top of the wall is not Rishus HaYachid. It's taka 10 tefachim higher off the ground, but it doesn't have an area of 4x4. However, what is this wall causing? That if this wall is surrounding a carmelis, and therefore it made it into a Rishus HaYachid, so this wall is fencing an area, rendering it into a Rishus HaYachid. So, and now you are standing in the Rishus HaRabim, and you threw something and it landed on the top of the wall. The top of the wall is 1 tefach. Don't come and tell me, oh, you didn't violate Shabbos because the wall is not 4x4. Whoa, wait. Do we say, so makim pturu, right? It's above 10 tefachim. You did nothing, not even the Rabbanan. Or maybe, since this wall is making the carmelis into a Rishus HaYachid, the wall is making the domain on the other side into a Rishus HaYachid. So if this wall is making that into a Rishus HaYachid, then maybe the wall itself becomes a Rishus HaYachid. Kaman the Malya Dami. What's Kaman the Malya Dami? Listen to his logic. So if you have, this is an area, right? And you have around the area of the wall. Since everything inside the wall is a Rishus HaYachid, let's make believe that the area inside the wall is filled all the way to the top of the wall. And if it's considered filled all the way to the top, then the wall has a lot more than 4x4. Then we're saying the entire space from one wall to the other end of the pie, you're going across the circumference, the round wall, or the boxed area. Well, if all of that is filled, then it's way more than 4x4. And therefore, if it falls on top of the wall, it is considered you transferred, you made a hanacha in a Rishus HaYachid, and you should be chayiv. That was the boya, right, that Rabbi Yechanan asks, to which Ola says, I'm going to say that it has a din of a Rishus HaYachid, but I'm not going to use your logic. I have a better logic. I don't have to view the entire carmelis, now Rishus HaYachid area, as it is full, even if it's not full. The top of the wall for sure is a Rishus HaYachid, and I have a Kavol Chaimer. La'achedim oisem mechitza. If when we view this wall vis-a-vis the area inside of it, renders that area into a Rishus HaYachid, so if the wall is making the area in it a Rishus HaYachid, then it itself for sure is a Rishus HaYachid. La'achedim oisem mechitza is la'atzmei le'kol shcheim. Now in life, sometimes it doesn't appear that way. Sometimes you can meet a person that brings joy to everyone around you. It doesn't mean that you're filled with joy. Just because you affect something on others, it doesn't mean that you have that same status. But maybe on a much deeper level, it must be that way. Because if you don't have it within you, then how can you bring it to others? And we're going to that level over here. And itmanami, not only are we citing the boya, or we answering the boya, but we're using Ula's logic. Amar Rab Chia Barashi, Amar Rav, Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yechanan. Amar Rabbi Yechanan. So here you see Rabbi Yechanan himself. Koisel Bereshus Arabim. The height of the wall is 10, but ve'ein rachav arba'a. And this wall is affecting an area in it, becoming a Rishus HaYachid. So the example that we're giving, Umukav lekarmelis va'asoi Rishus HaYachid, says the statement, Ha'zoirik v'nachal gabav chayiv. Why? Not because we view the carmelis as if it's filled until the top. No, we have the Kavol Chaimer, because la'achedim oisem mechit says la'atzmai loy kol shein. And now, another inquiry. Boy, Rabbi Yechanan, boy, Tisha, you have a hole that's 9 amas deep. It's 4 by 4, but it's 9. That means Atkan, it's not yet in the Reshus HaYachid. You go ahead and you stick your hand into the spit and you uproot earth. Now that you uprooted the earth, now the pit becomes 10 tfachim deep. I want to give a detail. While taking earth out of the ground, right, that in itself can be problematic. So we're not getting into the other problems of unearthing the ground, making a hole. It can be charisha. Let's just say that the earth that's in the pit was very loose. So taking it out is not in violation of anything yet. The only problem is maybe, you understand what's happening? Maybe now that the pit is 10 tfachim deep, you made a akira from the Reshus HaYachid. Now v'hishlim al asara. You put the earth down next to your feet. You put it down into the Reshus HaRabim. That's no question. The question is, did you do a akira from a Reshus HaYachid? Appreciate the beauty here. The pit only had 9 tfachim. Now that you took out this part of earth, now it's 10 tfachim. So did you remove it from 10 tfachim or not? We're adding the earth was loose. So do we say akiras chayfetz fasiyas mechitza b'hadiyad adikasi? Do we say, as we find, as we spoke out in our intro, gita v'yada boyin ka'achas? Gita v'yada boyin ka'achas. All of these things you find in the Torah, because the Torah comes from God, and God is above time. Because in the realm of time, cause and effect can never happen together. That's right, cause and effect. The cause has to be before the effect. But on a very high level, the cause and the effect happen at the same point. So that's really what the question is. Do we apply the concept over here? Now, if we were to apply cause and effect together, then what would happen? Then you're going to be chayiv. If we say no, first you lifted it, which is what happened. After you lifted it, now the hole has 10 tfachim depth. But you already lifted it. When you lifted it, it wasn't 10 tfachim deep. It only became a Reshus HaYachid after you did the akira. Right? If we apply the normal logic of first there is a cause and then there is an effect, then you're not going to be chayiv. If we're going to say that your lifting and the status of that hole comes together, then you did make an akira from it, Reshus HaYachid. So, how great is that? That was his kasha. Okay, now, and there's no answer. He has a kasha. However, we do want to ask the same question regarding a hanacha, because the rule of whether we say boim ka'achas or not regarding the akira won't force you to apply the same rule when it comes to the hanacha. You can argue that the akira is more significant than the hanacha. You can argue that. And therefore you can say, let's read weiter that because you can't say boim ka'achas, first you lifted it up. And only then do you have a Reshus HaYachid. Okay, that's maybe only regarding the akira. You need to have a real akira for you to call this an akira without any kunsen. But maybe once you already made an akira from a hole that's 10, now let's go to another case. What happens if you have a boy that's a soda? You make an akira from a Reshus HaRabim. No doubt. You pick something up from the Reshus HaRabim. The boy is 10 tvachim deep. You chap what's going on? When you put it into the pit, now the pit only has 9 tvachim because it became part of the floor of the pit. So did you violate a hanacha in a Reshus HaYachid or not? We're saying a chulya because a chulya, which is a glob of earth, you plan to leave in the pit. So halachically, it becomes batal, it becomes part of the pit. So before you put it down, the boy was a Reshus HaYachid. Now that you put it down, now the boy doesn't have 10 tvachim of depth. Umiyata, you reduce the height. Ma'u. Do we say hanachas chayfetz v'siluk mechitzas b'hadi adadi ka'asi? Here it's the opposite. Boim ka'achas, my friends, will exempt you. Think about it. Boim ka'achas will exempt you. Or no. Or we don't say that. Machayiv or machayiv. Not boim ka'achas means first you put it down. When you put it down, it was 10 tvachim deep. When you put it down, it was a Reshus HaYachid. The fact that a moment after you put it down, now it's only 9 tvachim deep, okay? That's after you did the hanacha. Now it's no longer a reshus hayachid. But when you made the hanacha, it still was a reshus hayachid. Right? The boim ka'achas here does the opposite of what it did before. Here, the boim ka'achas will be lakula. And you should know throughout the sugya, the Gemara is never going to differentiate regarding do you say boim ka'achas or not, whether it's affecting a kula or whether it's affecting a chumrah. We're not making that difference. We are just logically separating that the rule of boim ka'achas might not be applied by the akira and still yes applied by the hanacha. Because we're viewing the akira, the more significant part of carrying. These are Gavaldic concepts. So says the Gemara that Tishalei Mididei. Hold on. Rabbi Yochanan is asking the Boya, why doesn't Rabbi Yochanan resolve it from a statement that he himself made? It's not, because we learned in the Mishnah, we have this on Daf Kuf, Hazorik Arba Amas Bokaiso, the person throws 4 amas, and the item hits a wall. So says the Mishnah, if it hit the part of the wall that's above 10 Tfachim, which is considered the Makim Ptur, so it's Kazorik Ba'avir. In other words, you're good, you're exempt. If it hits the wall of Mata Masara, Kazorik Ba'aretz, and what is the din? Says the Mishnah. The Mishnah doesn't clarify what the din is. Then the Mishnah says that the Hazorik Ba'aretz Arba Amas, that if you throw something for Amas, you're chayiv. And on that we needed to understand that how can the Mishnah say that if you throw below 10 tfachim, the Mishnah is implying that you're chayiv. Why are you chayiv? Right? We already quoted this Mishnah many times, and we already know that the Mishnah is referring to you throwing something sticky, so it's adhering to the wall. We don't know that yet. The Havamina is that you throw something to the wall and it bounces back to you. And even though that the Mishnah says that throwing 4 amas into the Reshus Harabim is mechayev you, we are presuming that the thrower is standing 4 amas away from the wall. Problem is when you throw something to the wall and you're standing 4 amas away and it bounces back, it ends up landing within 4 amas. So that was the question that Rabbi Yochanan is asking. So it bounced back. And if the Mishnah is also speaking someone only standing 4 amas away, you don't have a 4 amas on the Reshus Harabim. And on that one, Rabbi Yochanan, the Mishnah is speaking about the Dveil Shmeinu Shaninu, that you were throwing something that's sticky, a sticky fig cake. And now the question is, now the Havamina is you're standing 4 amas away from the wall. When this sticky fig is sticking onto the wall, the Havamina is that it becomes bottled to the wall. So now, if you are measuring the edge of the wall, which is really the edge of the sticky fig, to you, if the wall began being exactly 4 amas away, when you add to the thickness of the wall, this Dveil Shemena, now the wall is thicker. Now, the extremity of the fig is within 4 amas, so it never went 4 amas. And therefore, it must be that we don't say boim ka'achas when it comes to E'anacha. First, the fig hit the wall. Now the wall became thicker. Too late. When it hit the wall was 4 amas away. So don't we see from Rabbi Yochanan himself that we do not say boim ka'achas by Hanacha? Says the Gemara, absolutely not. There, maybe we would say boim ka'achas. The reason why it doesn't render the person, it doesn't affect that the person should not be liable, is because the fig is never becoming bottled to the wall. Why not? Hassan le'mevatale. When you throw a fig against the wall, you're not planning to leave it there. You might be happy that it's being stored there, and we all know sooner or later the fig is going to fall off. Over here, when you put earth in a pit, so you're being mevatel the earth to the pit. So now the pit taka only has 9 tfachim of depth. Elama, if you don't say boim ka'achas, you're going to be chayiv. And that question remains unresolved. Now let's go weiter. Zajac DAF v'nachal gabi yeseidos. You have pegs. Now, my friends, the pegs are 10 tfachim tall, but the top of the peg is not 4 by 4. You have a bunch of pegs near each other. There's no lavut here. Whatever, they're laid out in a way you have the height, but you don't have any reshus hayachid. You now throw a plank of plywood. The plank of plywood falls and rests on top of the pegs. The top of the plywood is 4 by 4. Same concept. If you say boim ka'achas, so you can argue that the plank landed in the reshus hayachid. How great is that? Same question. Anachas chayfetz vasiyas. I was like, mahu. So the Gemara says, why are you asking? You're asking whether hanachas chayfetz vasiyas mechitzas b'adad kasi. In other words, do you say boim ka'achas and you're chayiv, or do you not say boim ka'achas? So when it landed, it wasn't, and you're pater. Why did I need Rava? Hainu the Rabbi Yochanan is just asking the same question, giving another setting. Says the no, it's not the same question. He coming by Leila Rava. The kasha Rava had was Zajac DAF. The Zajac DAF the chayfetz al gabav. You threw a piece of plywood, and there is something that's on top of it. It's not stuck on it, but it's laying on it. Now the question is mine. Right, let's go with the presumption that we do not say boim ka'achas. We don't say boim ka'achas. So when the daf landed, there wasn't a reshus hayachid yet. However, the item on top of it, what's the nature? When you have a plank of wood and you have something on top of it, when this is going to land, for a moment, the item on top is going to go up a little bit. Then it's going to fall back down. If we don't view these two items as one, so the daf itself is not boim ka'achas. But once the daf landed, if we will say, well, the item on top of the daf was a little bit above the daf, and it landed a second later, when that item landed, now it landed on a reshus hayachid. That's the kasha. Do we say, since the item on top of the daf and the daf flew together, it's viewed as the daf, even though they're not stuck on one to the other. It's impossible that the item on top was not slightly lifted and it de facto only rested a moment after the daf rested. So then it's like first you made a mechitza and then you put a chayfetz down and then you should be chayiv. That was the new kasha of Rava, and even on this kasha, we say teku. And imagine, the havamina here is that if the item, even though the item is not stuck on the daf, if it's flying together, you're one. It's hard to understand that side. And if it's one, then you'll be pater because we are presuming that we don't say boim ka'achas. Let's chop one more piece. Amar Rabba, more in Tanach. Pshitali. Guys, we had this on daf. I think we had this in the beginning of the Masechta. Mayim al gaba mayim. If I take water and I put it on top of other waters, and what's the question? The question is, did I make a hanacha? And the answer is yes. Even if the top of the waters is above, is outside of the reshus hayachid, right? It's in a makom ptur, or I don't care. Waters adhere to each other. So when I put water on top of water that was there before, it becomes one water. And if the bottom of that pit is in a reshus hayachid, then I put my water down on the reshus hayachid because waters become one with each other. That's pshita. Another opposite pshita. If I'm putting a nut down on water, daf kuf, even if the bottom of the water is in a reshus hayachid, but not the top of the water, and the nut doesn't become one with the water, I cannot use the ground under the water is 10 tefachim deep, and the walls, no, I put it on top of water. Really, the top of water has a din of a kanmelis. It's not a reshus harabim, it's not a reshus hayachid, and lav hainu hanochasim, and therefore, for sure, you're not chayiv. The question is, vayirava egois bekeli. If you have a vessel that's floating on the water, and you have a nut that you're putting in the keli or you're taking out of the keli, how do you view that? Now here, the boya of Rab is focusing more on a akira. So if you remember that a akira has to happen, what's the meaning of an akira? Akira means that you uprooted. Uprooted implies that before you uprooted it, it was stationary. If an item to begin with is not stationary and then you pick it up, it's not called a akira. You did not make the akira. The item was never rooted. So is this not stationary if it's in a keli that's floating on water? Do we say basid egois el zinon? Look at the nut's perspective, and the nut is resting in the keli. So you made an act of akira. So we have to be speaking about a case that the water has, we're not going into the status of the reshus of the mayim, we're speaking just about the stationary aspect of. Oidilma, basar keli azlinan, and the keli is loinayach. I also want to go back. So the water, the issue of the water is not just about the reshus, it's about being stationary. Akira is from stationary. Hanacha is back to stationary. So water, al gaba water becomes batal, so you made a hanacha. It's resting on the ground. So that he says, teku. And the final, what about oil on wine? Water and water adhere. does oil and wine adhere halachically? Now we know that oil always floats to the top. So that says the Gemara is a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuni and the Rabbanan. And we learned this above in the Masechta. As we learned, if a tful yoim touches something that's holy, he renders it into a sheni. So what happens if there was oil floating on top of wine, and a tful yoim touches that the oil for sure becomes tummy. Does the wine become tummy? So the Tanach holds the wine doesn't become tummy. They're not considered one. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuni says shneim chiver zelozeh. So that is connected. In other words, if they are considered one, water and oil, then if you put oil on top of wine, then you put it down. You put it down. Or if you lifted up the oil, you made an akira because it was stationary, it was laying on the ground. But if you're going to follow the shita that are not considered one, then it was never stationary to begin with. You didn't make a akira. If when you put it down, that's the pshat, you never made a hanacha, and you will not be chayiv, God willing, to be continued. That was great. We have to be in shul in 2 minutes. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Great day.